You are about to see something the major financial news networks will not show you. They are still talking about a soft landing, a gentle correction, or modest growth. They are still protecting the narrative. But the narrative is over. The American housing market is entering a phase of brutal, localized correction, and the evidence is no longer hidden in the data. It is on the street. It is in the number of price cuts, the ballooning insurance quotes, and the quiet, desperate inventory piling up in the metros that saw the most reckless price appreciation during the pandemic boom. For 2 years, the housing market was a casino. People left the expensive cities, bought sight unseen in the Sun Belt, poured money into rental properties, and believed that prices could only go up. They believed the hype. They chased the momentum. And now the bill has arrived, delivered not by the Federal Reserve, but by the immutable laws of financial gravity. This is not fear-mongering. This is a strategic warning, backed by the most recent forecast data from major economic research firms. We are going to name the 5 specific metropolitan areas that are predicted to suffer the deepest, most damaging price declines in 2026, the cities where the bubble is not just deflating, but actively bursting. Understanding why these 5 cities are uniquely vulnerable will not only save you from making the most expensive mistake of your life, but it will arm you with the knowledge to capitalize on the pain of others. You see, a crash is only a crisis for the unprepared. For the strategic investor, it is an opportunity. Our competitor focuses on where people are moving. We focus on where the financial ground is about to give way. Stay with us, because by the end of this analysis, you will know the difference between a minor price cut and a full-blown market implosion. And you will have the playbook for navigating the great housing reset. Let us start with the core psychological contrast that governs this entire phenomenon, the difference between nominal and real prices. The media will tell you that the average U.S. home price is still projected to climb by a modest 2 to 3% in 2026. That sounds safe. That sounds stable. But that is the first layer of deception, the nominal price. We have to strip away inflation. When you factor in the persistent pressure on consumer prices, inflation running hotter than those 2 or 3% gains, you realize that real home prices are actually declining. They are slipping for a second consecutive year, meaning the sticker price goes up, but the value you are receiving is eroding. This is the quiet reset at the national level. But the national average is a statistical distraction. It hides the catastrophic truth unfolding in specific zip codes. The housing market is now a collection of hyper-localized economies, and some of those economies are fundamentally broken. For the 5 cities we are about to analyze, the problem is not a gentle decline in real prices. The problem is a projected double-digit collapse in nominal prices. This isn't a slowdown, it's a structural failure. The core trigger for this structural failure is the affordability cliff. During the pandemic, home prices in certain Sunbelt and Western metros increased by 60, even 70% in some cases. When interest rates were at 3%, this explosive growth was masked by cheap debt. People could absorb the higher price because the mortgage payment was low. But now, with the 30-year fixed rate hovering stubbornly in the mid to low 6% range, the math simply does not work anymore. The median household income in these boomtowns has not kept pace with the doubling of the mortgage payment. Local wages cannot support the cost of entry, which means the local buyer pool is decimated, leaving only 2 groups: cash buyers, who are scarce, or out-of-state expats, who are getting smarter and pulling back. The cities that are collapsing first are the ones that relied most heavily on that flood of out-of-state cash and cheap pandemic-era debt. They are the furthest out on the affordability limb. The price-to-income ratio is the ultimate tether to reality, and in these 5 markets, that tether has snapped. This is the moment the music stops. The sellers who listed their homes at 2022 fantasy prices are facing a market with no buyers, forcing a cycle of desperate price cuts that only confirms the bubble is dead.
We are talking about a market where homes are languishing, inventory is piling up, and sellers are finally being forced to meet reality. These are not sellers moving for a job. These are sellers realizing they overpaid, or investors realizing their rental yields are collapsing. The emotional trigger here is the fear of being the last one out, the final buyer who purchased at the peak. Our analysis will help you avoid that fate. We now turn our attention to the first city on our list, a place that epitomizes the phrase, living on borrowed time and borrowed money, a market that is not just slowing down, but actively reversing its gains in one of the most brutal corrections of the entire cycle. This is where the price correction begins to look like a price implosion.
Our first stop on the implosion tour is Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Florida, a metro area that epitomizes the destructive collision of pandemic overvaluation and catastrophic climate risk. This area is not just cooling, it is projected to see a nominal price decline of over 10% in 2026 alone, making it one of the hardest hit markets in the entire country. To understand the collapse here, you have to look beyond the sunny facade and see the three fundamental cracks in the foundation. First, the unprecedented inventory flood. Cape Coral, fueled by its image as an affordable waterfront destination, saw a massive influx of people and speculative capital between 2020 and 2022. Builders raced to keep up, throwing up new developments at a frantic pace. Now the buyer demand has vanished, choked off by high rates, but the inventory keeps coming. Data confirms a record surplus of units, a surge of over 500% since the peak. The absorption rate, the time it takes to sell a home, is pitifully low. This isn't a normal market. This is an oversupply crisis. More than half the homes listed are forced to cut their price, far outpacing the national average. When price reductions become the rule, not the exception, the bubble is not just pricked, it is actively hemorrhaging. Second, the climate insurance extortion. This is the core driver of the structural failure in Florida. The pandemic boom was built on low borrowing costs, but the future of this region is being destroyed by high ownership costs. Severe weather events have caused insurance carriers to exit the state or raise premiums to levels that make homeownership mathematically impossible for the average American. We are talking about average annual home insurance costs that are multiples higher than the national average, wiping out any perceived savings from lower property taxes. This is a perpetual, non-negotiable expense that cannot be financed. When a buyer realizes their mortgage payment is $2,000, but their insurance and escrow payments add another $800 to $1,000, the deal collapses. The true affordability of the property is destroyed, and the market for the property shrinks exclusively to the ultra-wealthy or institutional cash buyers. The middle-class buyer is simply locked out. This combination of oversupply and skyrocketing fixed costs creates a downward price pressure that no amount of migration can overcome. The risk is now non-financial, it is environmental and regulatory, and it has permanently reset the value proposition of owning property in this metro. Third, the loss of the remote worker subsidy. Many buyers who flooded Cape Coral did so because they could work from anywhere and their six-figure New York or Chicago salary could buy them a canal front dream, but corporate return-to-office mandates have been quietly pulling that demographic back. The demand fueled by this out-of-state money has evaporated, and the remaining local economy cannot sustain the inflated prices. This city is a perfect case study in a market that grew too far, too fast, built on temporary, subsidized demand, and is now undergoing a painful, rapid deceleration. This is not the time to look for a deal here. This is the time to watch, learn, and wait for the full price capitulation that is still unfolding. Cape Coral is the warning siren for every other Sunbelt boomtown on this list. The narrative shifts slightly as we move to our second city, which suffers from the same foundational rot, but is exacerbated by a crisis of luxury and over-leveraged speculation. This brings us to Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton, Florida. While it shares the insurance and affordability struggles of Cape Coral, this area saw a higher proportion of luxury and second home purchases, often financed by investors looking for quick rental appreciation. That speculation is now unraveling. When high-end luxury inventory floods the market simultaneously, it causes a cascading price drop.
The investor panic here is palpable. They bought expecting rent hikes and price flips, but instead they face skyrocketing maintenance and insurance bills that eat away at thin rental yields. These investors will be the first to dump properties, accepting steep losses to escape the carrying costs, thereby driving the price floor down for everyone else. The psychological trigger here is the sound of the stampede, the race to the exit before carrying costs consume all remaining equity. Our competitors' audience, the financially anxious, should see this as the definitive sign that high-flying real estate speculation is over. The pursuit of quick money is now transforming into a forced sale. We must now leave the humidity of the Florida coast and head west to a mountain state that promised a high-tech future but is now finding its housing market suffocated by its own success, where the affordability issue is less about insurance and more about a simple, brutal lack of local income to support the prices. This brings us to our next city, a place where the air is thin and the paychecks are thinner relative to the cost of a home.
Our journey takes us high into the Rockies, to Denver, Colorado, a city that perfectly illustrates how the high-growth tech hub narrative can instantly collapse when confronted by sustained high interest rates. Denver's housing market isn't facing a climate crisis like Florida, but it is facing a severe inventory stagnation crisis combined with an acute affordability shock that is setting it up for one of the largest price corrections outside the Sunbelt. During the boom, Denver was the darling of the Inland West, attracting high-earning tech talent and boasting a fantastic lifestyle. Prices soared, but local construction couldn't keep up with demand. This is where the story gets critical for the strategic buyer. The high prices were only sustained by cheap, easily accessible credit. When the Federal Reserve hiked rates, the high price tags instantly became unmanageable for the median Denver buyer. The buyer pool, which was already highly sensitive to price, vanished. What happened next is the critical phenomenon known as the inventory lock-in effect. The majority of current Denver homeowners are sitting on mortgages with rates locked in at 3 or 4%. They have no financial incentive, zero, to sell their current home, move, and purchase a new one at a rate of 6 or 7%. Their existing low rate is financial gold. This has led to a near collapse in new listings. While this might sound like a bullish sign for prices, low inventory, right? It's not. It's a sign of a frozen market. The only sellers left are those who must sell: job transfers, divorce, death, or those desperate investors who over-leveraged rental properties. This distressed inventory is now competing over a dramatically smaller pool of buyers who are in turn being highly selective. The result? Denver's housing market is highly illiquid and susceptible to sharp nominal price drops because every sale that does happen tends to set a lower precedent. When the market is only moving on forced sales, the price action is always downward. Furthermore, the tech sector that fueled Denver's growth has been undergoing a quiet but pervasive job contraction. Mass layoffs in Silicon Valley often rippled directly into Denver's satellite offices and startup ecosystem. When high-paying job growth slows and you combine that with an inventory lock-in that paralyzes supply, you create a market where prices have nowhere to go but down, as inventory that does come online sits longer and longer. Denver is projected to see price declines exceeding 3% in 2026, which for a once stable market is a significant value-eroding event. Our fourth city is less about high tech and more about desperation. We are talking about the ripple effect of a far larger, wealthier, and more dysfunctional metro area. Let's travel to Stockton, California, which serves as the ultimate warning about the collapse of the affordability escape valve strategy. Stockton is not collapsing because of local job loss. It is collapsing because the people who sustained it, the commuters, have reached their breaking point. Stockton became a viable housing market for those who worked in the astronomically expensive Bay Area, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but could not afford to live there. They bought homes in Stockton and accepted the grueling, multi-hour commute, the famous supercommute, as the price of homeownership. This commuter demand artificially inflated Stockton's prices. The breakdown is twofold. First, the Bay Area itself has corrected slightly, making the commute slightly less necessary and less financially viable.
Second, and more importantly, the cost of that commute, gas, time, vehicle maintenance, combined with the high interest rates, has finally destroyed the financial calculus. The average buyer realizes the cost of the commute negates the housing savings. The demand from the Bay Area has shrunk, leaving Stockton with a huge supply of homes listed at prices only a six-figure Bay Area salary could support. The local Stockton economy, the true engine of the area, cannot sustain these valuations. When the out-of-town money goes home, the local money is simply too weak to catch the falling prices. The risk here is not just a correction, but an economic identity crisis. Stockton's prices are set by external factors that are now reversing. They are facing an affordability to income disparity that rivals some coastal markets, yet they lack the corresponding local wage engine. The projected price decline here is stark, and it's a direct result of the Bay Area's excess flowing out, then quickly retreating. This provides a clear contrast. The competitor highlighted the stability of markets like Kansas. We highlight the fatal instability of markets like Stockton, which are mere satellites of economic behemoths. We now turn to our final fifth city, a major North Carolina hub that was the crown jewel of the East Coast tech and finance boom. It is a market that has suffered from too much success, too much enthusiasm, and now is poised for a painful reset as the hype collides with the reality of interest rates and an emerging saturation of supply. This brings us to Raleigh, North Carolina, where the Research Triangle is facing its biggest housing test yet. The crash is localized, but the financial reverberations will be felt nationwide.
Raleigh, North Carolina, the heart of the famed Research Triangle, is our final city, and its vulnerability stems from a deadly combination: over-enthusiasm meets capital saturation. Unlike the organic growth seen in places your competitor championed, Raleigh's housing boom was highly targeted by institutional money and out-of-state movers seeking the next Austin. It was a momentum play, and momentum is the first thing to reverse in a market correction. Raleigh and its surrounding areas, Durham, Chapel Hill, benefited immensely from the influx of tech, biotech, and pharmaceutical companies, attracting highly paid professionals. But this success led to an overconfidence that has now inflated prices far beyond historical norms. The market became dependent on two things: sustained double-digit annual wage growth and continuously low interest rates, neither of which is currently present. The primary risk for Raleigh is a profound mismatch between local income and home valuations. While the jobs are high quality, the sheer volume of price appreciation pushed the median home price to a level that requires household incomes far exceeding the local average. As demand cools due to rates, the glut new construction inventory, initially intended to meet the unending demand, is now sitting stagnant. Developers who bought land at peak prices are being forced to offer deep concessions and, eventually, significant price cuts just to move the properties, setting a much lower floor for existing home prices. This phenomenon is critical. When new inventory can only sell at a discount, it immediately devalues every comparable existing home. Raleigh is projected to experience a significant, painful correction in home prices, a necessary reset to align home values with the actual income capacity of the Research Triangle's long-term workforce. The takeaway from all five cities, Cape Coral, Northport, Stockton, Denver, and Raleigh, is this: the era of asset price inflation is over. The cities that rode the highest wave of speculation, subsidized by cheap debt and pandemic migration, are the ones facing the most brutal reckoning. Your competitor's analysis of stability in states like Kansas and Ohio is correct. The smart money is moving toward predictability, while the speculative money is fleeing from volatility. The lesson for your audience is not merely to avoid these five cities, but to understand the financial principles of their collapse. High interest rates plus overvaluation plus inventory saturation plus non-negotiable fixed costs, insurance, and taxes equals market implosion.
This knowledge transforms fear into a strategic advantage, allowing you to prepare for the inevitable ripple effect. The best move is not to panic, but to save cash, monitor these distressed markets for the eventual bottom, and recognize that the greatest wealth is often created when the panicked money is running for the exits.